So welcome, everybody. I'm Sheila Jasanoff. I direct the program on science, technology, and society here, and together with Ben Herbert and Chris Saha, who are here in the front row, I'm the director of the Global Observatory for Genome Editing. And I would like, first of all, to welcome all of you from far and near to this event. I want to give a little bit of the context for today's discussion and then hand over to another welcoming person, George Daley, who is not able to be here in person, but he has sent us a message that we will be playing for you. George Daley, the Dean of Harvard Medical School. So as some of you know, maybe many of you know, there was supposed to be the third International Summit on Genome Editing taking place in London this March. And because of COVID, which also counts for last minute drop-offs and absences in our own ranks, what happened was that they canceled that meeting or put much of it online and decided to have the in-person version next year. So as members of and directors of the Global Observatory, we had been planning to go to London and put on a sort of session that was piggybacking onto the summit. But when that was cancelled, we decided that it was too long to wait until next year to carry our discussions forward, which to some degree run in parallel with, or maybe even ahead of, the discussions that are happening in the sciences and technologies. So for quite a long time, at least the three members of the managerial team for the Global Observatory have been in discussions on, broadly speaking, biology and society, and then frontiers in biology and society, and then of course genetics, genomics, and then gene editing, because these were the things that were happening at the frontiers. I mean, just to give you an idea of my own involvement, before I came to Harvard in 1998, I had been at Cornell University for 20 years, from 78 onward. And already in 78, Cornell had a thriving undergraduate major in biology and society, which eventually became part of the STS program and then STS department, which I founded. So this biology and society interface or intersection or Venn diagram has been part of my thinking, my teaching, and my administration, but as long as I have been involved in academia, so that is a long time back. And then before the Global Observatory, we already had a network of some 20 plus researchers at a variety of universities in something that we here at STS at Harvard called the Biology and Society Co-Laboratory. So it's been a flourishing intellectual network for really a long time before certain developments that are crucial to our conversations here today. So in 2017, we had a meeting that was extremely well attended, and several of the people who are here today and will be speaking today were involved in that. And that's the editorial aspirations meeting, whose poster you see right there. And that meeting had a couple of interesting offshoots. So there were about 35 speakers at that meeting, and almost everybody signed on to a couple of articles that appeared in Trends in Biotechnology. We just call them the trends pieces. So, that paved the way for the idea of a place of reflection and convening that then became the observatory when the Templeton Foundation gave us a major grant a couple of years ago to drive those discussions forward. In the meantime, of course, the discussions on how we should approach the ethics and the governance of these frontiers technologies had been going forward. Many of you are familiar with the fact that in 2019-ish, there was a call for a moratorium. And we had a second meeting, which is the second poster that you see in that set of images, called now Editorial Humility. I mean, so sort of where does one begin to think of where one should hold back in a sense and think before one leaves? And then we decided that since anniversaries, I mean, somehow these 5 fingers have a hold on our human imagination that is hard to undersell. And so 2022 was 5 years since 2017. And we decided really on kind of on the spur of the moment after the summit was canceled that we should not hold back on our discussions. And that in very brief is the history of why we are convening here today. But again, as many of you know, at firsthand and as leaders in the discussion and debate, the questions about where do we go with these technologies and what do we do has been propelled by a variety of episodes, not least the so-called CRISPR baby experiment of 2018, which was announced in the second of the international summits. So I think everybody here is energized to be thinking about these things, but everybody here is not enough, right? I mean, we are interested in broadening these discussions, north and south, east and west, across communities. That is something that is ethically, in terms of professional ethics, extremely important to the organizers of the observatory. You see it in the makeup of the observatory itself. I'm a lawyer by training. Ben Herbert is a historian of science and science studies person by training, and Chris Zaha is a bioengineering person by training, but we have been working together for, it seems like forever. I think it probably began in a previous life, but in any case, more than a decade. So this collaboration is in a way also an embodiment of kinds of conversations and discussions that we have been promoting. So because of the time and because I want us to listen to George Daley's welcome, I will stop with that and ask our tech team to play George's welcome to us. He's very sorry that he couldn't be here in person.
Hello, and thank you for that introduction. I'm sorry that I can't be with you at the meeting, but I'm here in Europe, having just attended a meeting on stem cells sponsored by the Pontifical Academy of Sciences and held at the Vatican. Science advances in unanticipated and transformative ways. And in 2012 and 2013, several scientists discovered and then applied the RNA-directed nuclease system we now all know as CRISPR. They enabled for the first time highly efficient genome editing, which set the stage for rapid translation into heritable germline editing of mice, monkeys, and humans. The rapidity with which CRISPR genome editing found its way into humans within 3 years alarmed scientists. And importantly, one of the discoverers of CRISPR, Jennifer Doudna, decided to respond. Now, Jennifer and a few colleagues, including myself, gathered together, including Paul Berg, David Baltimore, and Dana Carroll, each of whom had participated in the landmark Asilomar meeting that first introduced the notion of scientific self-governance or recombinant DNA some 40 years earlier. We, the participants, wrote a commentary piece that appeared in Science magazine, calling for a prohibition against efforts at germline genome editing, to allow time for the weighing of societal and ethical implications, and time for responsible uses of this technology, if any, to be identified. Now, importantly, we also called for forums in which experts from the scientific and bioethics communities could deliberate on this new era of human biology, hence setting the stage for meetings like our current one. Now, the first international summit on human genome editing followed some months later in 2015. And in laying out the charge of the meeting, David Baltimore noted the historical context in which CRISPR gene editing fell in the long history of human genetics, stating that we are now close to being able to alter human heredity, and now we must face the question, how, if at all, do we as a society want to use this capacity? That first meeting led to a call for more research on the safety and efficacy on the endorsement of clinical translation of somatic gene editing under existing regulatory frameworks, and importantly, a prohibition against proceeding with any clinical use for heritable genome modification at that time. Indeed, it would be irresponsible, as the committee felt. Now, in the continuing evolution of attempts at governance of these fast-moving stem cell and embryo technologies, the ISSCR reconvened a task force to determine what had changed and evolved since the last guidelines a decade earlier. In 2016, there were new considerations like induced pluripotency, the production of iPS cells, which reduced but did not eliminate the need for embryonic stem cells. The advent of iPS cells dissipated much of the heat over the destruction of embryos to harvest ES cells, but nevertheless, new controversy smoldered because scientists were learning how to create embryo-like structures from stem cells and seeking to perform ever more creative embryo interventions, such as mitochondrial replacement and heritable CRISPR-based genome editing. The 2016 release of the ISSCR guidelines broadened the nature of specialized review to encompass all embryo-related experiments and specifically prohibited heritable germline modification due to lingering safety concerns and a lack of societal and ethical consensus. Now, after 2016, several learned bodies tackled the thorny issues of heritable human genome editing, with the US National Academies calling for more research and endorsing somatic applications, and opening the door ever so slightly to the prospect that germline editing research trials might be permitted, but only after much more research to meet appropriate risk-benefit standards for authorizing clinical trials. Now, likewise, the Neufeld Council on Bioethics concluded, taking a step even further towards possible endorsement, that were all safety concerns to be addressed, as well as other societal and ethical concerns, we can indeed envision circumstances in which heritable genome editing interventions should be permitted. Now, during the years following the first international summit on human genome editing between 2015, 2018, virtually all public pronouncements from study groups and professional scientific societies called for prohibitions against clinical use of heritable genome editing. However, as we were all headed to Hong Kong in the November of 2018 for the second international summit on human genome editing, we on the organizing committee learned that one of our speakers was indeed planning to announce the creation of 3 genome-edited babies. Now, this shocking announcement, it was widely condemned, and the scientist, Zhang Ke, was jailed for violations of human subjects protection. Of note, he has served his 3-year sentence and has recently been released. But questions about the best means of governance to ensure compliance with standards and guidelines remains to be defined, with jail hopefully being a last result. In the aftermath of these ethical violations and premature clinical translation of heritable genome editing, two major studies emerged in the 2020-2021 timeframe that I'm certain will be referenced over the next day and a half. One from an international commission comprised of representatives from numerous scientific societies, especially the US National Academies and the UK Royal Society, which have anchored many of the core scientific governance deliberations of the past several decades. And a second from the World Health Organization. Now, while each of these studies has unique features, there is broad agreement on recommendations, which include continued prohibitions against heritable genome editing at this time, the need for further safety evaluations, and suggestions that clinical studies proceed incrementally, prudently, and stepwise, subject to prospective but not reactive governance, and a call for more social dialogue and engagement, again, our reason for convening here at this conference. Now, in 2021, the ISSCR has again updated and refined its guidelines, now the fourth iteration in which I've been involved, but this time the guidelines were ably led by Robin Lovell-Batch. Here again, we had to acknowledge and integrate bold new scientific advances that included the further creation of stem cell-based embryo models, the emergence of brain organoids that subsume highly integrated neural function, and further advances in embryo manipulations and, interestingly, in vitro gametogenesis. Now, most noteworthy in this newest set of research guidelines is the recategorization of prolonged embryo culture from impermissible research to research that is subject to review that might deem it worthy and permissible. This change, most consequentially, then challenges the longstanding 14-day rule. Over the last 2 decades, I've been involved in serial efforts to formulate frameworks to govern the professional, societal, and ethical conduct of cutting-edge biomedical research and its clinical translation, as the exciting and very transformative fields of stem cell biology, genome editing have emerged and evolved at a breathtaking pace. Over the last 2 years, I've been privileged to co-chair alongside Alta Charo and Atul Bute, a National Academy of Medicine committee aimed at formulating a universal and comprehensive set of principles as a foundation for a framework of scientific governance for any and all emerging technologies in health and medicine. In April, we held a virtual public conference for the Committee on Emerging Science, Technology, and Innovation in Health and Medicine, which presented and discussed the core ethical principles of justice, autonomy, fairness, collective and individual good as the foundations for any system of governance of an emerging biotechnology. Speakers described how these principles could be translated into aspects of science policy and ultimately into a governance framework, which is now going to be formulated through the work of an upcoming consensus study sponsored by the National Academies. The lesson I've learned that has emerged from these experiences over the past 25 years, since being drawn into the field of stem cells, is that while the science evolves, the bedrock principles that should govern the conduct and responsibility of scientists remain steadfast and unwavering. It remains for these principles to be interpreted and applied in the many scientific situations and the many scenarios that scientific advances inevitably present as challenges to us. So I leave you by commending Sheila and Ben and Chris and the other organizers of the Global Observatory, and wish this gathering a stimulating and provocative conference, as the work you will do together today and tomorrow is essential to fulfilling the calls for public engagement, discourse, and deliberation. It's up to you and to the community to translate these bedrock principles into practice. And Thank you for your attention and good luck for the upcoming meeting.